You probably recognize the aphorism, all politics is local.
Microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All politics is local, which is attributed to former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill. All history is local too. Hopefully today's presentation will make Union's local history more alive and more meaningful to those of us who aren't terribly familiar with it. Many of us at Allberg Golf and Yacht Club are from somewhere else, whether it's Seattle or California or the East Coast or the legendary Timbuktu. If we came from someplace else, we don't necessarily know very much about our local history of Hood Canal or of our community of Union, a census-designated place, by the way, or about AGYC, which this year is 53 years old. This talk is an effort to introduce three of the colorful characters from Union's past who were portrayed in Mike Fredson's book, The Artist Colony on Hood Canal. We are grateful to the Mason County Historical Society for co-sponsoring this presentation. The Historical Society is dedicated to preserving, publishing, and sharing the history of Mason County and maintains a collection of historical materials and exhibits at its museum on Railroad Avenue in Shelton, if you have been there. If you haven't been there, you should check it out. If you're looking for something fun to do that the Historical Society is sponsoring, you should attend the 16th annual car show on Sunday, June 24th. That's the last Sunday in June. I'm also pleased to announce that we have arranged another presentation on local history to be given by Kristen Fabry, who is the Executive Director of the Historical Society, here on June 19th, Tuesday night on June 19th at 5 p.m. So I hope many of you will come for that presentation as well. I'm delighted to introduce local historian Mike Fredson, standing up here, a fifth-generation native of Mason County and a past president of the Mason County Historical Society. I see people are still coming in. Do we need some more chairs? Okay. Mike is the author of a number of books besides The Artist Colony on Hood Canal. He's the author of Beast Man and Hood Canal. I think many people have seen this one. He is also a poet and a Vietnam War vet. After his presentation, Mike will also, there will be a short Q&A period for any of you who have questions. And Mike has also brought along copies of several of his books. If any of you are interested in buying them, he will autograph them at the same time. We would also appreciate your support of the Historic Society if you wish to leave a small donation in the jar over there by the door. And without further ado, let me introduce Mike. Oh, I guess I forgot one other thing. We are recording this it will be available in a link that will get to the Historical Society. So just so you're apparently doesn't want to be recorded. So just be aware we are recording the presentation up here. Again, without further ado, Mike.
Can I talk loud enough?
No.
No.
Yes. No. No.
How about if I do this? Can I come up front maybe and talk?
We're recording.
Nice to see everybody here. It's great to have your kind of 50th anniversary to celebrate, and it's great to be able to come and talk about the place that we live and the place that we honor every day. I kind of wanted to, my talk is about the Artist Colony on the Hood Canal, which is really three characters, but a range of people actually, and over the globe it reached, and so I want to talk about those people, but I kind of want to talk a little bit about how we all got here. You know, Hood Canal is really, I say this to myself all the time, you know, when you go to Europe, everything's thousands of years old, and you know, we're 250 years old maybe. You know, so we're still young, and it's great to recall our history and recognize where we are. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here. George Vancouver, 1792. He was on his voyage to kind of claim land for England and to go to Friendly Cove and meet the Spanish. And so the Spanish had already settled at Nia Bay and Port Angeles, had little forts there. So Vancouver landed in Discovery Bay, which is of course named after his boat, and then let 3 rowboats down the canal. They got to the Union Flats essentially. They were met by locals who they recognized right off were more than they were, who wanted to trade everything they could. So they knew he talked with somebody, the Spanish, and they also all had smallpox. So he decided that he wasn't going to investigate the canal anymore, and he left the area. But that was in May of 1792, so about this time of the year. The people that met him were, of course, the Tawanas, which are the name of the tribe that inhabited all of the canal. The Clowns, of course, north, and everybody had a watershed. The locals ended up being on the Skokomias Indian tribe, and name. People of the Skoke was that little deal, and they ended up with that reservation because it was the place where there were the most buildings. And so they concentrated the settlement there in the 1860s. But almost immediately, the canal was discovered to be a gold mine of timber. San Francisco was building, California was building, and so the canal was slowly inhabited in little coves by sea captains and loggers, and one of them was John McCreevy, who actually was the son-in-law of a guy named Gove, who was one of the earliest settlers in the canal. Built the Union Blockhouse in 1851. He had a boat up here called the Ferry that he hauled logs back and forth to San Francisco. And so when McCreevy ended up marrying his daughter, Nellie McCreevy Anderson, he ended up being in Union and really settling in to be the father of Union, to run the logging camps, to mainly do railroads. McCreevy was industrious, likely congenial because he served in the state legislature for several years. By the 1880s, just about the time we became a state, Union City, 1890, I think, was founded. And that was founded by McCreevy and a group of investors from Port Townsend. Because Port Townsend Union City was going to be the terminus of 3 railroads. And one of them was the Port Townsend Southern, which was going to connect Port Townsend to Union City. And along the way, as we know, there's no highways in 1890. So this was our mass transportation, and there were suspected minerals in the Olympics. People considered that this would be like Minnesota, Wisconsin, with minerals coming out and making everybody rich. From Union, one of the railroads was the Washington Southern. It went to Grace Harbor. The other railroad was the Union City and Naval Station, which went to the proposed Navy Yard. All these plans were huge, as we recall, in that era. 1890 is a boom and optimism, and so the Panic of 1893 was started in 1890 with a failure in Argentina. So it's kind of fun how that worked out. Nonetheless, the train crews came came to Union, started building, and a week later they shut down because there was no more money. As a result, McCreevy owned tons of land here and nothing to do with it. So, by the way, John didn't die rich. He died of used car sales. But by 1907, the San Francisco earthquake had happened, I think 1906, and as a result, a guy named Frank Pixley, this is the guy who developed Hood Canal. So, in 1907, he came up and started purchasing property. He had a plan to develop Hood Canal just like San Francisco and call it his new San Francisco. He was the nephew of, oh my gosh, another Frank Pixley. The Frank Pixley that he was the nephew of was an original founder of San Francisco. He came, was a lawyer. Can I get some water? I know there must be somebody here who can do it. Helped found San Francisco, turned into the secretary of the president of the Southern Pacific Railroad, who was Leland Stanford. And as a result, if you've been, I think it's on Highway 99, Pixley, California, in there? Yeah. You missed that, did you? But that was, uncle had enough to be able to develop railroads himself, found towns himself, and create a railroad that, for some reason, there's no record of. That the secretary somehow lost all presidential records. And part of the reason might have been that this guy, Frank, thank you, that's great. Frank Pixley was real political, as you can imagine, and owned a newspaper called The Argonaut, which was, in San Francisco, there was people who were on one side and one on the other. Amazing how that doesn't change. And in addition, he not only created lots of the conversation in San Francisco, which was the most cosmopolitan city on the coast, but he also, at that time, Mark Twain actually wrote a book called Around the World or something like that. Somebody, I bet you knows the name of it. But took a bunch of journals and stuff on it, and then I went with it. He was also a member of the Bohemian Club. Anybody know the Bohemian Club? Okay, it was kind of a group of elites that met and still meet together in California. And so Frank Pixley is also a member of that. So I say all those things because those attitudes are what his nephew, Frank Pixley, brought up with him. His goal was to create a new San Francisco. His goal was to have art to be important, have travel to be important, to have all the higher sensibilities of the world, not to be burdened by normal human characteristics and difficulties. And so he was our first land developer from California. This is the guy who started the commercial development. I think this will work. Okay, I'm going to go on to, I showed Pixley enough because that was funny. But he also developed the water system, the electrical company he was the founder of, the telephone company, and he sold the property that built Olympus Manor. And I wanted to say that because that's really where the artist colony is, and how long did it take me to get there? Okay, this guy is Ori Nobles, and he is really the promoter, the dynamo, the guy who can charm everybody. In this photo here, he calls himself the king of the canal. He also named lots of the people in his little group of this arts colony. There's a woman called the Duchess. He named Frank Pixley high priest and archbishop. We named those things, and he created a magical place here, and it was centered on the Olympus Manor. And the Olympus Manor was built just after the highway went through in 1922, by the way. Nothing much happened until 1922. And when the road went through, Olympus Manor, his family came down from the Seattle area, I don't know where it is, and it ended up settling down here. Or Knowles had come down earlier, in 1914 when he was 20 years old with his sister, I believe, then decided it was so wonderful. That year he went to Bellingham Normal and got a teaching certificate, came back in 1914 and taught school at Tahuya. And all of the students adored him. He designed the gymnasium, he designed the teacher's cottage, and I have to say that we're a historical society member. Liz came in, and that's great. And she showed me yesterday, we'd gotten some stuff from another one of his relatives, and it had the drawings that he had made for these cabins in 1922. And so even in those days, his family knew that he was remarkable.
Yeah.
He not only was a teacher, but he was a traveler. He was an art collector. He brought artistic strategies back from the area. He traveled to Hawaii first, and then Mexico. Then he hopped on tramp steamers and went to China and Japan and the Philippines, to Hong Kong. The poor guy could not stop. And in those days, those are like the 20s and 30s, not quite the 30s, but we're getting there. There was kind of a feeling like vagabonds. There was kind of a way to live. You go do strange things. All his friends would be the long distance swimmer in the Columbia River. They did things that they would. One of his friends was going to travel across the Pacific. Barely didn't make it. But that was their challenge. He was artists from everywhere. He was so magical, I want to say, that he took Ori's Olympus Odyssey, Ori's Oriental Odysseys, Ori's Oddities Olympus, something like that. In 1935, 1936, and 1937, he teaches Ballard, take a tour across the Far East and come back and start teaching, except one year. Oh, I want to say this, just so I don't say it, don't forget. And this guy's Gene Tunney. Do we know what Gene Tunney is? Okay, that's a weird one. Pretty Years. When skipping ahead, it's all in his photo, but he was also a radio personality. What did you do? Oh, did too much?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because this is my coolest picture. It's got Olympus Manor. I was just showing to somebody else. I know there's somebody from Grays Harbor here, so I'm going to tell a Grays Harbor story. Jim Middleton, who owns the photograph collection. What's it called? I can't remember. But in it, in 1948, there was a radio personality from Grays Harbor who hired an airplane to go around and take pictures of all the houses along the canal because they were from Grays Harbor, and then he could sell ads to them. And so Jim got these photos, and he's got some of Alderbrook I didn't have on here, but this one is of Olympus Manor, which here's a lodge up here. I'm going to say something. The music room, which I'll talk about in a minute. This was Tory Gate, if you know anything. I did. They're welcoming gates of sanctuary for harbors in the Orient. These are the, I know these are Schaefer's. Somebody will tell me for sure. I'm not sure if that's. These are little cabins that were made by Ori over the years, and I'm going to say after 1935 and 37, somebody's been in those besides me. Great. They were little tiny things, you know, and I looked and I was like, man, they're so cute. They're like made for people that's a little bit shorter than us. But because he was a tourist guide and a promoter, and that's what he expected to be able to happen. But it didn't. But those were so wonderful, so cute. Ori, where am I at here? And here he is in his music room. This is Ori. He would create things. All the churches and stuff in Seattle had torn down, 1900 churches, and they all had these Gothic, great things that nobody would want except him. And so he came down here and created this music room that had this deal. And of course, here's the high priest and Archbishop Pixley. But he would bring really seminars of people down that were associated with academia sometimes. Sometimes there were people that he knew that could create plays and musical concerts. His windows, I talked about, all stained glass, and it was like he was trying to create a room that was the mind of an artist. That music comes out of these things, organs where they're the voice of God, that the light comes in kaleidoscope, that it's magic, and I really, so I love that, and he, let me try another one. In 1930, I got the date on there, which is really great, but he made carpets, and he made carpets in China. He was hired by someone in China to go make carpets in China for the New York market. So they hired a group of people to do up his designs, and he lived in China and designed carpets for a year. He was on sabbatical from Seattle. Came back, or he could entertain and delight anybody, including the Tacoma Drama League, which was, think of now, it's the 1937s, and what's the world like in America? We're in the Depression. Not much good things going on, except for rich people in the Tacoma Drama League. Except they weren't rich enough, I guess, to be able to travel to the Orient. So he brought the Orient to them. He's got the Tory Gate. He dresses himself in costume. There's his brother. And all these people, you come down, it's like a seminar with Ori. And I've got pictures of him, they're all drawing pictures, you know, or in the evening he'd have bonfires, and there would be people that would be playing in the music room. It was Olympus, I'm going to say that. How close am I to what's next? Okay. Don't look at that one. I want to say a few more things about Ori. Ori, I called him a friend of the famous because he liked to know and did know everybody. There was a guy named Upton Close, wrote several books. His real name was a guy named Washington. He's a writer and broadcaster. He wrote books on a train across Asia. Was a guy who was the newscaster
in Pearl Harbor in 1941. When we heard Pearl Harbor, it was from up and close. He was one of his buddies. One of his best buddies was Don Blanding, and I know somebody will know Don Blanding. Maybe, yeah, okay. Post-World War II, he was a poet who, really a journalist who worked for the Hawaiian Golden Star and started writing poems about living in the South Seas and being magical, being vagabond. And so Ori and Don Blanding were real close. Another one of his friends was, of course, Gene Tunney. I pointed that out to you. In 1928, when Gene Tunney was training for his heavyweight fight with somebody, they beat him because I don't know the other guy. Ori went back there and they stayed in the same cabin for probably 6 weeks while the guy trained, and then every night they row across the lake to the cabin and come back. Okay, now I'm going to skip forward a little bit almost to this guy, because I want to talk about a minute or two about not only did this matter in 1922, but Alderbrook Estates is built on something called a tract called the Sunny Beach Estates. Alderbrook is on 2 of them by a guy in 1930. They were all Scandinavians from the Gold Rush. And the guy who was this developer was Henry Stumer, who was a laundromat. But he tried to build a hotel down there, ended up here. And so the genesis of Alderbrook, although it started selling in 1913, was with the railroad, or when the road came through. Stumer tried to do Alderbrook like the Dalbys did also, because the canal has always been, apparently, a draw for tourism. And so the first ones was wooden floor tents, is what they had. Dalby's had the same thing. Dalby's had a dance floor. That's what it was. Had a dance floor that people could come in. And I wanted to say also that there was no refrigeration, so foods weren't probably that great. But Alderbrook Creek was the cooling opportunity for them. But you know, to have an artist calling like Ori has developed, it takes not only a promoter, but someone who will be promoted. And so really fortunate, because not only do tourists like to come here, but other people like to come here too, and they'll pay to stay here. Yeah, nothing in the microphone, that's what I want. And so we've been real lucky. The Schaefer family came down, the Bishop family came from Alderbrook. People came, the Nordstroms were here, the Johnsons were here, because it was a great place to come to. And they supported Ori's wonderful magic, and he'd create opportunities for people. He would, but it takes not only artists, but it takes an audience. And so that's one of the reasons the artist calling was able to succeed, because it had one. And it also had, if Ori was a promoter, this guy was an artist. Walden Chase and Corwin were actually about the same age as Ori, but a different temperament. Corwin was in World War I. He was a map maker, came home. They decided they didn't want to work, so they decided that they would learn to do something else. And so they learned to do woodblocks. That seemed to be the easiest thing for them, and I'm not sure how it was, but Waldo in the end was wonderful. But I also wanted to say, before I forget, that Ori brought that technique of woodblock cutting back from the Orient. So he was really a bridge artistically, and not just for us, but Waldo knew Morris Graves. And he taught, Gilkey was another one, Anderson was another one. A lot of artists are connected to these guys here, and Waldo in particular, Waldo's my guy. he was just, he was skinny, and he was a vegetarian, and all he thought about was artist stuff. He wasn't trying to get rich. He wanted just to live. He wanted to be able to make the world better. And not, but he came from a background, his mother was Mother River, who was a hospital in Seattle at the time. They were associated with Presbyterians, I believe. But Waldo decided he didn't want to be anything serious, so he wanted to be an artist. He came out here. He ended up teaching for 2 years in the Scope Valley. Interestingly enough, I got to say this, he only lasted 2 or 3 years, and the superintendent, I'm afraid, was my great aunt, Jean Todd Fredson, who found that his teaching methods were not normal for teachers, I guess. but he, in his, not only did he create an ambiance for people to consider art. And here's a wood block. Someone came, he lived in teepees for a while. And here's a wood block of it from January 28. Someone from Japan had come over and cut that for him. Here's a wood block that I brought that I own. You only get to look at it because it's really cool. But there are several different color schemes for that. And some of them are colored, some of them are blue and gray. I mean, and so it points out that color schemes matter in your response to art. And Waldo knew that, and I like this one the best, but he created lots of prints and lots of different color schemes, black and whites, browns and yellows, blues. I mean, it's a collection that lots of people admire. I have this because that doesn't look like Waldo at all, does it? But one of his students was Ed Ardall, which didn't mean anything to me until Ed Ardall's wife, about 25 years ago, had her son call me and brought down a bunch of stuff, Ed Ardall, and meet at the historical site. I don't know who you are, but it turns out that Ed Ardall was Waldo's student, and when it came time to go do something, Waldo said, like, go down and see Walt Disney. He's doing something down there. So Ed and his brother, I can't remember his name because his brother came home, but Ed stayed down there, was a cartoonist, and these are what he drew. He did Snow White, he did Fantasia, he did Donald Duck, he did a whole lot more. If you go online, it's just amazing. He has a background, and so apparently Disney is known for not paying his illustrators. And so this guy wants more money, and I'm quitting. And so he quits and goes to work and starts for Hanna-Barbera and does the Jetsons, the Huckleberry Hound, all those ones. I'm sorry, I grew up with it. And it's like, crazy. And so he would come back every year. And these guys who I didn't know, they brought these things called cells. And if you know anything about art comics, which I don't, they're from the drawings that they make, and they're valuable. They had one of Lady and the Tramp that was, it wouldn't let me speak. I'm not trustworthy. Waldo, if I just how far am I on? Whoops, okay. You can see after that. These people were the ones who did Alderbrook, but I wanted to say also for Waldo is that during World War II, he went and taught printmaking in conscientious objector camp in Oregon. I think it was Benton, Oregon, or something like that. There he met several of his fellow artists as they rotate through. And I think it was run by the Quakers. I'm not sure, but there were several camps around, because that was his calling. Okay, I want to do Overbrook because I saved the best for last only because I know I've bored you to tears. But now you're going like, okay, who are these two? The canal is really left-handed. I don't know why I said that one, but lots of weird things happen left-handed. These two women purchased Alderbrook, and I'm going to get the dates exactly wrong, but like 1927 from Stumer, who'd owned it for a while and bought it. Actually, it was this woman and a woman named Mustard. Her name was Mustard, but Miss Mustard married, and so Miss Flagg took her spot in the partnership. And so these two women operated Alderbrook during the war years and created a community. Actually, more than that, they created an opportunity for people to sell their wares, because at the same time, I'm missing all the local artists. I didn't talk about Ethel Dalby, her painting, she was associated with the Cornish Art School, you know what that is. I didn't even talk about Beckman, Doug, who did the Robin Hood. He was a set designer, so he came up here and made Robin Hood and called it Nottingham Village. There was Kristen Hauser, who Ori named the Duchess because it was part of his little kingdom of the canal. And in fact, she would go to China and be the hostess when Ori's groups would come to Beijing. She'd be there being the hostess of them. There was I went through some more stuff. One of the Dalby boys was an artist that I bet you people still have paintings of his. He liked to do boats. There was Jones, who was also an artist, and I think in the end, the canal draws that out of people. You can't help it. And these people, whatever their disabilities might be or their incompetencies, are drawn to the canal to facilitate their lives and speak through their art. And so I think that's why a lot of these people end up here. They ended up selling to these people ended up selling to Schaefer family in 1944, something like that. And the Schaefer family's owned it for a little while and had the cabins. That was them. This is another one of those Spiegel photos I talked about. There's Alderbrook in 1948 with yacht. One of the things that they used to talk about was yacht haven. Somewhere on the canal. This is a Bishop Brook boat. The owner is a rich kid. In the back there, Bishop, I can't remember his name. Somebody here knows. These I wanted to show. These are what Ori would send through the mail to. This was to Gussie Hovey, who was Anne Scroggs' mother. She was a shaver, and he would illustrate these things and send them, and they would get them. The first time I saw them, I went down to see Anne, and I was precious not here. And she pulled these out. She had been saving them. This is too good of it. In her sock and underwear drawer for 40 years because they were so valuable and they were so beautiful. She probably has a dozen, and there's several around. But in 1952, Olympus Manor burned down. Here's Ori, apparently looking beaten. His dream is gone. It's 30 years old. All he's got left is a chimney. And so I say it, ending that, I think that's the end. Let me see. Well, we'll say it's the end because I screwed it up somehow. Okay, it is the end, yeah. But the same person that sent the original drawings, sent drawings that he had drawn to do a new lodge. I thought, this guy will never quit. But it didn't happen. It's where Blue Heron is now, of course. And if you go by slowly, you'll still see some of those little stone statues and stuff. Okay, thanks for listening to me. Questions or comments?
The organ in the picture that was that here? And is it still here?
It was in the music room. I don't know where it is.
Probably burnt down.
I do know where the piano of Amy Anderson is, which is really weird.
Tell me about the guard parties.
Well, you know, that's one of the things. That's one of the things that that he would do. He would take them out there. It was part of his high summer activities, and they'd go out there and make noise and drink. And as long as nobody drowned, I think it must have worked great. I know. Would you like to say something? I really would like you to. No, he's got a great relation to the canal, so we're fortunate for all that stuff. Okay, comments, questions?
Didn't the Green Nobles place burn down?
Yeah, 1952.
Yeah.
So that's is that where the Blue Heron is?
Yeah, yeah. Took on the lodge, so that's right.
So if he traveled a bit in Asia, did he leave a mark over there as he has here? Is there active culturally?
No, that's a great, fun leading question, because you know he was really a garage sailor. He would go. China at that time was, you know, like fourth world, I guess you'd say, and so they would be selling these things. I've actually manifests of what he had purchased, but he generally traveled in this elite expat collection of people, and they'd all have their hotels. There's a bunch of things I didn't say that they would just travel around, and like, there's a Chinese chain, like Chang or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but there were people that was named that, and there were 4 girls, and they transferred them to California or something there, but they operate like that. And so in San Francisco, you'll see a residue of Ori, and I've had people come up from San Francisco with light fixtures, not these, but you know, because he designed light fixtures, or he designed windows. He just couldn't stop, and these people would send me these things that's like, geez. So that's the magic of it, and I'm amazed at everybody saved everything Ori's. I got his journals, I got his scrapbooks from different people, because they didn't throw any of this stuff away. And then this lady came up from Georgia, but he was a character that there's other things you could say about him.
There's a gal by the name of, I think it's Cindy, who runs the
Cindy Sun?
Yes. Her folks had kind of a little resort here.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought Bob was here. Yeah, they for a while owned, what's it called up there?
Up towards Little Rock.
Yeah, what's it called? I can't remember, but it's got a big RV deal. It's got a little store. They got a waterfront dump. In this house here, in this book here, I've got a picture of it. But if you see if I can find it, Rest a While. It was called Rest a While.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I didn't tell you everything, although I tried.
I came up here in 1952 as a child, of course. No, I came with college students. And we stayed at the cabins down, right next to the old inn. No one believes me. They were there. Of course, they've been remodeled.
Yeah,
15
sure, they were
times,
built in
but
1948
we
or
stayed in
something.
the first one. Boys had one and girls had the other. But no one believed that. That's wrong. It's true.
Hang in there. I want to tell you another story for you. But a guy named, you'll love his name. Let me see if I can say it right. Name's Mike Hemp, and he is associated with a boat called the Western Flyer. Does this mean anything yet? Okay, not yet. It didn't to me either. But John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts, who were people from Carmel. We all know John Steinbeck. But they were associated with this Western Flyer deal. And Ed Ricketts, who is considered the founder of marine ecology, published some book about this thick from Stanford in 1926 or some crazy. But so John Steinbeck wrote his book, Grapes Wrath, and so apparently the people that didn't like it were the grape growers. And so they apparently put a contract out on old John. And so John and Ed hopped a boat, the Western Flyer, and went down the coast of Mexico. And they ended up writing a book about it. I can't remember. But this guy is up here because he's trying to replicate where Ed Ricketts was, to be able to offer an opportunity for this Western Flyer. They're going to remodel it. Some guy's going to put $2 million into it and make it an educational boat for high school students, where the UW has one now. You see it in the summer every year. Yeah. That's the UW, and they want to create that for here. And so we've been cruising Lilywop and Hood Sport and trying to find the place where they lived. And people, no, that's not it. That's not it. It's just, so it's, yeah, the canal really has it's been a tourism trap. I never said Pixley's brother also came up, and he was the one that developed Madrona, and it was first built as a bunch of little cabins for people to come up with in 1907. Jeez, what kind of stuff is this? Did you want something?
No, my parents bought in Madrona in 1955.
What's your parents' name?
Helen and Chuck Rowe.
Sure.
He owned the lumber.
Sure, I totally get them. I'm Vigor, and Batstone. Yeah, yeah. And what happened? What? Tell me, just gossip. What happened to your dad?
He went south. He took the lumber south to Southern California, and then retired and started growing avocados.
Good for him. Good for him. People still talk about him because I go to lumberman's all the time.
And now, did Waldo Chase do oil paint? No.
Yeah, he'd do a mix, but he's principally a woodblock, and woodblocks are really. Have you ever look at this one? They're a pain in the butt, and you got to do them backwards. Jeez.
You should explain how a wood block is made. Maybe some people don't know.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. That'd be interesting.
Okay, I got to bore the rest of you. I can't do it right.
Boring.
Okay, well, usually woodblocks, this one, I'm going to hold it up just because, see, there's 1, 2, 3, there's really 4 colors on this, which typically means you have to cut this thing 4 times because you can't smear the ink. All it did, and I've got a picture, he make little notches where the Japanese did a different thing. He would have a print, which he carved, but anyway, he had little notches, and so he'd have to get them in, and then sometimes the colors would bleed over, because he wouldn't get it quite right, but I don't think he allowed those to go on until he was older. The way you have to do it is, that the 2 I showed, Corwin couldn't carve anything. But Waldo he was perfect at trees. I love Waldo's trees. And he had to do them backwards. And these are kind of, I watched him do one. And he just like, oh, let's see, you got a Pepsi? I just like, and so he's got to do that thing X amount of times. Sometimes you can do two, but if you're going to run the colors, you've got to have them so separate. And then you can't use the block for a whole long time because it gets saturated. So there's a lot of, so did you want to?
No.
Okay. I'm like,
How did you get involved? With Walter? Yeah. How did you get involved in all this?
I'm a Vietnam veteran. And I came back, and my parents let me live on the canal. And so Waldo was just in the street. So he was a lifesaver to me.
Do you still have your cabin?
yes, we do. The oldest cabin on Hood Canal. That's what I say. But we still have it. So
Is Fredson Road related to one of the
awful.
Fredsons?
It's named after me. Really not. But Michael Fredson is my great.
And he lived in that area.
Yeah. He was a log scaler for Simpson. And so, but he also built stuff. And so he really didn't start there, but he built Camelchi. Camelchi was a log dump. And so he built that and he lived at the end of Fredson Road, which is where Mark Schmidt lives. Isn't that where? Oh, you don't even know. I'm just, Mark Schmidt is someone that you would know Mark Schmidt, that's right.
He has a ranch there, right?
I don't know if you call it that, but probably.
Is that related to Max Schmidt?
Yeah. Son.
How about McCreevy House? What's happening with McCreevy House?
Thanks for asking. Janie Kamen is trying to do stuff with it. I'd encourage you. McCreevy House, I'm not talking about that today. I tried to skip a whole batch of history there that is really cool, but it's not as magical as Ori. The McCreevy House is a restoration effort that always needs support. And Jeannie Kamen, I think, is the boss of it right now. And I don't know what her phone number is.
I do, if anybody wants it.
Okay, there you go.
Friends of McCreevy House, that's the organization, no problem.
Yeah.
Cool.
Might look one box that he has available, he'll sign them, and then if you want to put the donation in the jar over there, not required,